everything comes, out of which all things come, matter as well as spirit. So there's just sort of one stuff emanating from the great divine womb, or the ground of being, to use Tillich's phrase, and it's all of a piece. It's all united to begin with. Now, some of that stuff reaches consciousness. When that happens, we say we've got human beings in the picture. The original thing isn't, well, there's men, and then we're going to take a rib out and create women. No, right out of the primal womb comes all of the same stuff. We're all united, and out of that comes the two genders, male and female. So what that does, and why she thinks that is so important right away, is so that we've got a positive sense of matter. Matter is as much created by God as spirit is. It's the same stuff. Matter is just, as he says, the externality, the external part of the stuff of the world. Spirit is the internal side of all of that. And what that means at the beginning is that human beings are not like over above nature and this other way of thinking about God as a supreme being and us emanating out, but we're already in nature. We're part of nature. And therefore, we shouldn't dominate it, but be caretakers, to use her word of that. So she wants an ecological ethic out of all of that, a harmonious blending of both the rational and the emotional, imaginative side of life. Don't dominate, but we should be caretakers of the world. So their picture of God, that's an image of the fine womb. Of course, the matrix out of which everything comes of life. It's easy to talk about God like that in feminine terms, as mother. Matthew Fox, one of the reasons of being silent is because he said God is both father and mother. And they didn't like that. Him to say that. It's very easy to have both maternal and paternal imagery out of this whole approach. God here is the matrix. Secondly, in theology, you have to question who we. What can we say about us? That is anthropology. And of course, Rosemary's big thing is we have the same human nature. We all have recognized one as persons. We're all persons, first of all. We exist as males or females, and we have productive differences, those kind of anatomical differences, but none of that says that there are necessary psychological, sociological differences. And she says the danger for women is they begin to fall into the trap of thinking of themselves in the way that men want them to think about themselves. That what happens is that men very often cannot deal with their unconscious, their irrational side, with the strongly emotional side. This is her analysis now. Men deal with that very well. So they project that out onto women and then have ambivalent feelings about it. And as part of it then is to put down. I can't stand inside myself, so I stand these illogical, irrational women on me. And he said, danger, Rosemary, that's bad enough on the part of men, but it's worse. As she says, the sin of sexism cuts two ways. It's not just a male sin. It's a female sin as well, woman's sin as well. Because it's as much of a sin to allow yourself to be defined that way as it is for someone to try to do that to you. He says that the sin cuts both ways. So her strong plea is that women don't allow this to happen to them, to be defined that way. They have to fight against it in Rosemary's mind. But instead, what they've got to do is try to develop their own capacities, and as she says, in a non-dualistic way, which means, for her, that you're going to use the skills and capacities not just in the home, but in whatever public arenas that one functions as well, as whether it's a citizen to vote or a person in the workforce or whatever. But that would be one of the dualisms she would want to overcome between domestic and public, so that women wouldn't let men define them, and they wouldn't let their roles be defined only in private terms. They have as much right to shape the culture and to determine the direction of things and to be in the public life as men do, and they have to, again, fight that. Doesn't mean every woman's got to run for office. She doesn't mean that. It just means that one shouldn't arbitrarily define oneself in a private kind of way. Christ, for her, becomes a model for redeemed humanity, but she wants to make sure we have women in the picture as well. As we'll see, Mary becomes an important part of that. So that's our anthropology. Who are we? Kind of thing that Rosemary wants to put in front of us to overcome patriarchy and sexism. Then her Christology, or understanding of Jesus Christ, has a lot of stress on Jesus the Liberator. And all the feminist literature, if you're familiar with that, like to stress it. That is that Jesus was a barrier breaker. He broke down the social taboo so that he talked to women in public when you weren't supposed to do that. He touched women, which was a tremendous taboo in his culture. He brought them into the religious discourse, talked to them about religious matters, which is also not part of women's function or role in that society. And more than that, he sent them forth as the missionaries, the evangelists, the apostles, as happens with the woman at the well, and is sent forth to evangelize the rest of the people. It happens with Mary Magdalene, who's sent forth to tell the other apostles about Jesus' resurrection and so on. So he breaks the patterns of domination of his own society, rises above it, and becomes the barrier breaker. And then, next category, and I'm pulling some things together here, but is our understanding of Mary. And again, Rosemary insists that if we're going to have a viable feminist movement, then Mary has to be an important figure, and what we've got to do is getting away from seeing her as a passive, dependent person and see her as a more active social critic. And the great touchstone for that is the Magnificat, as we find it in Luke's Gospel. My soul magnifies the Lord. And then it goes on to talk about how God throws the mighty down from their thrones and raises up the lowly. And the implication is that this grace brought into the world through Mary really has social significance, that it changes the patterns of life and raises up those who are oppressed. And if we see Mary in the light of the Magnificat, then she won't just be a plastic figure or a submissive, passive person. She becomes a very strong person that is to be reckoned with and who saw the implications of grace in the social order. The exalted will be below and those oppressed will be raised up. And the next category has to do with sin and the question of evil. And Rose said, one duel and we better keep rid of all the other dualism between body and soul and men and women and nature and faith and so on. But one we have to keep, and that is the dualism between good and evil. We have to be able to talk about sin. Because sin is to fail up to the ideals of a mutual society. He thinks feminism helped bring this out. This movement has shown us the sinfulness of patriarchy and what sexism, gender privileges, and sexism is all about. And so she has an interesting phrase in there. What we need away from the sin of patriarchy is a conversion to relationality. That is, you have to need a conversion to the idea that we live in relationship, that we're a basis of mutuality, that we have to support and strengthen one another. We're not allowed to dominate. Remind you there what I was talking about before about Pandora and Eve and so on. Then in number 6, she's trying to get us into action. What are we supposed to do about this? She wants women to take charge of their lives, be self-affirming creatures, use their skills, and try to, in one way or another, bring this compassion and love to the world. What does she want us men to do? Well, she doesn't want us to lead the struggle for women's liberation, that's for sure. But she would like us to be in solidarity with women who are in the struggle. That's a hard role to figure out how to play. Hard to know what one would actually do in that way. And I think a lot of men who are in sympathy with the women's movement struggle greatly with that, figure out what it actually means. to be in solidarity with women who are trying to struggle for liberation. And that's probably a good, healthy tension to try to work out gradually. And then the church. Now for Rosemary, the church is, Rosemary goes to Mass regularly. As critical as she is of the church, she attends at the Newman Center at Northwestern University. Goes regularly, considers herself, what is it, her phrase, a non-exclusive Catholic. In other words, she's a part of the Catholic Church, but doesn't want to put other religions down or anything, wants to be open to them. And so she thinks that the church really has to reform itself, that it ought to be a leader in the struggle against sexism, need to open up all the ministries to women and so on. And then her interesting contribution to this, how are we going to move forward against patriarchy and sexism? She thinks that Christian women will do best, not by following Mary Daly and leaving the church and taking up the goddess religions and witchcraft and so on. Rosemary thinks that the way women will do best is to stay in the church, fight for its improvement, and form supportive feminist groups where they can come together and support one another and enrich and have their own kind of rituals and read the scriptures in their own ways and so on. Have that kind of women group. They call it women church today very often. And women would, in other words, be in both those roles. They'd find some of their strength there, but then they would stay in the church to be able to continue to try to reform it and make it a better institution. I think the social psychologists would probably say that Rosemary's approach will probably do better than Mary Daly's approach in the long run. That to go completely outside the institution, you lose all leverage over it. You can't do much anymore. You can't get the ear of the pastor. You can't push for, women servers or for women lectors or wherever it is in the local parish. If you're outside of it, you have no leverage. So the idea is to stay inside of it. And finally, Rosemary says we need wisdom to get in touch with nature again and to learn peace and justice when bodies and spirited bodies are in proper relationship to one another. And she gets that other feminist theme in there, environmental theme, that we have to gain an appreciation of the earth, of matter, of flesh, of blood, and all of the earthy kind of elements. That's part of the way of wisdom. It's Barry's idea. The earth will teach us. The rhythms of nature will teach us. We just listen to what's going on in our bodies. We'll learn from our bodies. Well, there's a lot of talk of that these days, isn't there? That people say, well, listen to your body. The body's telling you you're tired. You better stop working. We'll lay down for a while. Take a break, or body's saying that it's time to party and, for a while. So listen to the body as part of what Rosemary is after. Okay, let me stop there and see if we have any questions anyone wants to ask or comments before we get into Matthew Fox's section here. Now, I'm diverting from, I'm trying, and I'm not really good at this, but I'm going to try to do it Fox's way. Fox's way is not rational and 1, 2, 3 and all of this. His way is very different. And so I'm going to just try to sort of exegete one of his texts the way he would do it. How many people here have read the book The Cosmic Christ? I'm very glad. I'm on chapter 25. I don't know where you are. Well, yeah, we had one hand in it, I saw. Anyway, I'm borrowing from that and entering into this with great trepidation, but I will try. What Fox's approach is not to lay this out in a systematic way like Rosemary Ruther. His real way would be to get in a circle and dance about it. to tell a story about it or to paint. So Fox is into methodologies as release the right brain, the creative side. Therefore, no, I'm not. And I'm not going to ask you to come down here and dance with me or no. Fox takes up this way. He looks at the Song of Songs. That's one of the books in the Bible. And he tries to interpret the Song of Songs. Your notes won't be any help to you here of where I'm going with this. But Fox starts out, I'm just going to tell you what he says. He starts out by talking in the Western world, our attitude towards sexuality. In other words, this whole dualism thing, the sexism, is bound up with our attitude towards sexuality. So he says in the West, he asks what he hears from religion in the West. And he says he hears two things. One is silence. In other words, the church has nothing to say about it. Nothing he thinks is worthwhile. If the ever does say things, moral, he hears two things. Silence, nothing worth saying about sexuality, and the other thing is that we get moralizing that everything is a sin in relationship to sex. If there's one word that he would say is the attitude given from religion, from Christianity to sexuality, it is regret. A regret that it's sort of here. I mean, it gets in the way. And whose fault is all of this? St. Augustine's fault. All of this is St. Augustine's fault. That sexuality, we have this regret over sexuality. And what do we need in its place? Instead, we need to celebrate and praise sexuality. Praise is what we need. Now, how are we going to go about doing all of this? Well, what we're going to do is go back and find a whole spirituality around sexuality in the Song of Songs. That's a book in the Bible. It's characterized by one interesting fact. It's the only book in the Bible that never mentions God. Song of Songs doesn't talk about God. Now, that's very unusual for a book in the Bible. What it does talk about constantly is sexual love. And so much so that throughout history, people have not known what to do with it. Most interpreters of the Song of Songs have said, well, yeah, it's all about sex, sexual love, but that's an allegory to tell you about the relationship between God and human beings. God and Israel, God and the church. It's always been used in an allegorical sense most times. Fox tells a story about in the time 16th century Spain when some guy translated the Song of Songs from the Vulgate, the Latin, into Spanish and was thrown into jail for 5 years just for translating it. So it's been a source of difficulty throughout history. In fact, some people believe that the way you interpret the Song of Songs is a key to a culture, whole outlook in a culture. And so what does it end up telling us? What kind of things does it tell us? Well, first of all, it's a series of love poems, and it's very graphic, and about how the lovers are interacting and how they see each other. And first of all, I guess we would say is that it represents a whole praise or celebration of sexuality as part of nature. And because it's part of nature, it's part of God's creation. Because it's part of God's creation, there's a fundamental goodness about it. And one should praise and delight and celebrate and play in relationship to sexuality. Then he says, we find in Song of Songs that the woman, the dialogue between man and woman, woman is a very self-possessed person, very together. One who decides how she's going to act sexually. She says, my vineyard, mine to give. My fruit is mine to give. Sexual delights with her are hers to give. She doesn't just, isn't coerced into it, isn't dominated by it. She has self-actualization on her. She's in charge of all of this. In doing all this, she recognizes her goodness and her beauty. She says, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily growing in the valley. She's not taken over by self-doubts and putting herself down. She feels good about herself. She praises her own beauty. She doesn't have a false sense of humility. She knows her goodness. I'm like a lily growing in the valley. So, but also, she's able to say no. She recognizes limitations. She says, I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. So in the eyes of my lover, I am one who is welcome. Fox interprets that as meaning that the woman in the love poem is saying, she just doesn't give herself to anybody. It's only the lover, the one she's committed to, that will welcome her and that she will relate to. I am a wall, she says. She knows how to say no. It represents the idea that infidelity is a sin. It's an offense against the cosmic order of things. That's how Fox keeps interpreting this poem as a cosmic poem. It's something that sexuality is rooted in the whole world of nature, of bodiliness, in this 15 billion year history of ours. And then he talks about how the woman is passionate. She has passion. She's able to look at her lover, and she describes him. And of course, the imagery is not her own imagery. It's my lover. This is the woman talking. My lover is radiant and ruddy, stands out among 10,000. His head is pure gold. His locks are like thick palm leaves and are as black as the ravens. His eyes are like doves beside brooks of water. His teeth seem bathed in milk, and his smile adorns his face like finely set jewels. And it goes on and on like that. His mouth is delicious. His whispers are dear. And his expressions desire and quote itself. What he says to me, creates this desire in me. Such is my lover. So the woman is self-possessed. She is able to say no in the right situations. And she has passion for her lover, and she's able to say it, express it out loud. But the man in the poem as well is also expressive. He's able to return the words of love. He's not pigeonholed or stereotyped in some sort of macho silence. It's not reduced to silence. He speaks as well. And he says to his beloved, how beautiful you are, my dearest, how beautiful. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Some of this imagery gets a little strange here, but what can I tell you? Your hair is like a flock of goats. Now, I think if some young guys are looking for a line to use, it's probably not a good one. Somehow I like her imagery better. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes ready to be shorn. Well, it gets better here. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely when you speak. You are a park full of plants, he says. You are an enclosed garden. My sister, my bride. That's interesting. My sister, my bride. What is that? The word sister connotes, again, some sort of a friendship and mutuality. There wouldn't be just the patriarchal business of husband with bride. A garden close locked with a secret fountain. You are mysterious to me. You have a secret fountain within. And then all of this begins to be related. The woman responds to this now, and she sees this not just in her personal terms of interaction, but in a larger cosmological framework again. She draws on nature, so she says, the fountain in my garden, that he was just referring to, is a spring of running water flowing down from Lebanon. And then she sort of calls in the whole of the cosmos to witness this love event. Arise, north wind, O south wind, come. Blow upon my garden. Let its alluring perfumes pour forth. Then will my lover come to his garden and enjoy its choice fruits. Now, this is the Bible I'm reading from. Some people don't like to hear poems with sexual imagery in church. I found that out when we used some. Some people, we had a young woman in our parish who was a poet, very fine. She wrote poems for after communion. Sometimes they had sexual imagery in them. And people did not like them very often. They thought they were irreverent, not proper. I could respect that, but it'd be interesting to see if you didn't tell them, where it was written and then read it and then say, well, I know you didn't like it, but it is from the Bible. Come, be swift, my lover, she says. Be like a gazelle or a wild young stag. Come, play on the mountains of myrrh. She refers to herself as the mountains of myrrh. Then Fox says he wants us to notice another thing about the poem. So the cosmological side drawing in nature. And then he wants us to see the ecstasy involved, which he thinks of as letting go. In other words, he thinks it's one of the problems in the world is that there's too much restraint, not enough letting go and letting be and allowing whatever is inside of us to emerge. And his institute, as I'm told, and so on, he likes to get people involved in doing things with their hands or creating crafts or dancing and so on. So that letting go theme is very large part of this. And so he equates this with a scary side, with the wilderness. The wilderness theme comes in. So whatever the lovers are getting in touch with is like the wilderness that's scary. In other words, you can get carried away with this. This can take you over. It might lead to some things you don't want. The lovers emerge, it said, out of the wild, up from the desert, leaning and holding on to one another. They emerge from this wilder kind of world. The sexual encounter, this is Fox, the sexual experience of these lovers is an encounter with the wild, with the wilderness, within and among them. And then he goes on to talk about Jesus wrestling with the cosmic forces of angels and demons. He also says when they talk about they're going to make love on the mountains, he says that again, the mountaintop is a place of beauty, but it's also a place where storms gather. It's this place where one meets the awesome God. To begin to get the sense that sexuality, there's something awesome about it. And that's what Fox is saying. If we're ever going to get it straight about this sexism and so on, we got to get the idea that sexuality is sacramental, that God shines through it, and God will only shine through it if somehow people let go into it. Great storms gather there. Great storms can take you over. It has to be strong with all of this. Then he says, there's also a sense in the poem, realistic sense of the pain of the love relationship, the potential pain of loss, the death of the loved one, the separation, the feeling that it won't be as much as it should be. And so the woman says, very conscious of all of this. With my own hands I opened to my lover, but my lover had turned away and was gone. Great pain that I called him, but he did not answer.
The watchmen met me as they made their rounds of the city. They struck me and wounded me. She's sort of the prey of others here. Lover's gone. Then the guards of the wall took away my cloak. I charge you, O young ones of the holy city, if you find my lover, what shall you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love. Fox says, love holds the power to make us faint, to make us suffer deprivation, the misunderstanding at times because of its great strength. The other side of love that's brought out is our mortality. The woman speaks again. Love is as mighty as death, passion as fierce as the grave. Its flames are a blazing fire. Deep waters cannot quench love. No flood can sweep it away. So we have here the interplay between love and death. And the great biblical notion that even love ends up being stronger than death. Love is so powerful. It does not, as Fox says, love does not flinch before death. Able to look it in the eye. She declares, if one were to offer all that he owns to acquire this love, he would be utterly mocked. One of the things that he points out here is that in the poem, the lovers stay away from the stereotypical roles. They're not just playing out safe sexual roles. It is the woman who is the, what do I want to say, the aggressive one, the word he uses. She begins the poem telling us of her desire and where it will lead her. She's in charge of this thing. I will sing the song of all songs. For I desire that my man may kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Take me and we will run together. Bring me into your chamber, O my king. So it breaks down the typical, stereotypical role that the woman is to be passive in the relationship. She is not at all. She takes the initiative here. She goes looking for her beloved. Tell me, you whom my heart loves, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you give them rest at midday? She's going to create this relationship. Tell me, my true love, lest I find myself picking out life as I sit among your companions' herds. He is lonely at night without him. Night after night on my bed I have sought my true love. I sought him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. I said, I will rise then and go about the city, through the streets and the squares. I will seek my true love. I sought him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. So a breakdown of this sort of stereotypical idea. And then Fox goes over to the male side of this. And he says, what he finds in the male, again, is a breakdown of the stereotypical roles. For the male is patient. Male lover displays a well-developed anima, as he says. Fox is very much into this Jungian idea that Rosemary doesn't like. He is willing and able to wait, to be patient. So he says, I tell you, O young ones of the holy city, do not arouse my lover before her time. She's sleeping here. Let her go. I charge you by the spirits and the goddesses of the field. Makes a big thing out of this. I charge you by the spirits and the goddesses of the field. It's a throwback to the nature religion. Remember, in the biblical idea that the Bible felt a need to break away from the nature religions of the Canaanites because they had things like sacred prostitution, and the gods inhabited the world. And so the prophetic biblical religion said, we can't have that. We meet God not in nature, but in history. And so they moved away from the goddesses, away from the fertility rites, and had a religion where you met God in history. What we find here in this passage is a remembrance of this other nature religion that stood behind Judaism. I charge you by the spirits and the goddesses of the field, by the gazelles and the hinds, do not disturb my love while she was at rest. His love is really not possessive. Oh, he lets go of her, even appreciates her mother. or being devoted to the mother. He loves her because she's devoted to her own mother. He's happy about that. He didn't have a problem with mother-in-law. And then Fox finally is talking about the importance of play in all of this, that there's a certain lightheartedness even in the midst of the passion that one has to begin to look at. Well, that's a very different approach to all this. What does all that mean in terms of the sexism and the patriarchy? It's typical of Matthew Fox. I mean, to take a love poem, to reinterpret the tradition, and to give us another feel for the same question. It's instead of a rational analysis of it, what he hopes to do is touch our imaginations and our hearts so we can see in the biblical tradition there's another way of relating. And this way of relating is not to look down on sex or see it as something bad or embarrassing, but to see it as God's gift. To be, and that pleasure is fundamentally good, not bad. And that we're not bound into certain roles in this regard. That humans are supposed to be human and act as they are, out of their own inner insights and instincts. And then all of that then becomes sacramental. We have the whole business of sexuality becomes, as he says, a theophany. That is a manifestation of the presence of God, and one of the most important ones. Well, what would happen if you took Fox seriously and you began to get another outlook on that? Then the male-female relationship changes, and one can't imagine it on the model of domination. One immediately thinks of mutuality and equality and exchange and conversation and dialogue and growth together. And he says that's the way we will recover a healthy outlook. He said the problem is that the mystical sense of sex is given away to pornography. Pornography doesn't have any of this sense of the mystical, of the cosmic, of the great gift, the way sexuality links us in with the earth and the world and bodiliness and so on. So that's the secret to improving sexuality in our culture. That's the way we ought to teach our young people, he says. We ought to make the Song of Songs the sort of spiritual book that we would go to teach sexuality. And in that way, then we begin to have better relationships. We aren't dominating. And we also maybe open up the whole ecological question again. Because he thinks that if we relate better to one another, we're going to do better with nature and with the earth. Let me stop there and see if we have questions or comments or anything else that people want to say. Yes? Is Matthew Fox consider himself a theologian? Yeah. Yes, he does. Yes, he does think of himself as a theologian. And he, not only that, I think, but he sees himself as the leader of a major theological movement, which we would call creation theology. He even went so far as to say that what liberation theology is to Latin America, so creation theology is to the United States. There would not be many theologians that would agree with that. See, my bit is, I want to take authors at their strengths. Matthew Fox's strength is not his systematic theology, believe me. I mean, it would be so easy to poke holes in much of what he says. And I've told you this before, but I've talked to some of the major theologians about him, like, why don't you write about his books or critique him or whatever? And the answer comes back, well, where would you start? They don't take him seriously as a theologian. But he has to be taken with extreme seriousness as a poet, as a prophet, as a guru, as a spiritual guide. That's what I'm writing my reflections on this week, is to see Matthew Fox in that way. That's his strength, and in that way, he has tremendous things to say. Because as a poet, he's touched the heart. He understands how people are hurting. Understands how the wounds that people have accumulated in the culture, male and female. One of the things he talks a lot about is male liberation. He says that'll be the next great movement. He's got great antennae, you know, he knows what's going on. He says we'll have male liberation. He says because males are hurt as much by patriarchy as females are. And that the male liberation will take some other different forms that are not clear yet. We're just beginning that movement. So that's his strength as a prophetic figure, it seems to me, and as a poet, a guru, a spiritual guide. And then he's sort of talking to the heart. Talking to the heart and saying, you know, well, where are you hurting? You know, in creation spirituality, we got something for you. However you are estranged, I will bring connections. One of the things that is in the notes they're talking about there, he's talking about the cosmic Christ. His whole book, The Cosmic Christ, was written as a response to dualisms, he said. Although in other places you'll see it written as a response to something else. But that's one that he said, of dualisms. So he sees the cosmic Christ as the great connector, the one who makes connections, and therefore keeps us from being split. So the cosmic Christ brings men and women together, because the same Lord inhabits our hearts, gives us strength. His strength is not as a theologian, it's as the poet, I think. And it's valuable.
This is doing so much good in this way, you know, for people. Then why is the Vatican, this is not really being wrong in theology, you know, why would the Vatican silence him?
Well, it's a very hard thing for me to understand. I don't know that. I would say this, that the first thing the Vatican did was to set up a review board of 3 Dominican priests. One very conservative. He comes to the CTSA convention, that's Catholic Theological Society, Benedict Ashley by name. He's known as one of the most conservative theologians that comes to the convention. And so he was one of the 3 they set up to investigate Matthew Fox's work. They came back saying they saw no heresy in it. Benedict Ashley said, I find no heresy in what he wrote. He's a very conservative theologian. After they did that and gave their report, they silenced him. So it becomes very hard to know, you know, exactly. Matthew Fox says the charges, as he said they never told him what the charges were. No one ever came to him and said, these are the things you did wrong and why you have to be quiet. But he says, surmising from the literature and the exchange of letters, I hope I'm going to remember this now, they said the charges as he said them were, 1, that he called God both mother and father, 2, that he preferred feminism to patriarchy, and I'm not going to remember the others. Yeah, because original blessing is more important than original sin. That's 3. Well, we get 4. That's right. That was the other one. The other thing that I read was because he had Starhawk, a witch, on his faculty at his institute out west. I mentioned that last week in here. The Vatican is not like witches. It's not into Starhawk. But anyway, those are the reasons that he gave. There's been no... They called the book Original Blessing, which incidentally next week I'm going to talk much more about the book Original Blessing as a response to original sin. That's the topic next week. They call that a dangerous book.
I don't see how this will help anyway, because all of the students that have been educated in his school will be going out and therapy themselves. You know, what would
I just wrote in my article, Reflections article, that from many perspectives it does not seem to be a wise move, even from the Vatican's perspective, because as soon as they silence him, you produce lecture series on his work. And you sell a lot more books. And it seems like a counterproductive procedure. It just gives him a lot of publicity. You know, he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times. There's a full-page ad in the New York Times explaining. It's entitled "My Last Statement Before Being Silenced." He issued it December 13th and then went into silence December 15th. The full-page ad that people never heard of creation theology or spirituality now have through the New York Times. I mean, and down at the bottom, there's even a little form you can fill out to send him money and join the organization. I mean, he had 25,000 members when he started. Who knows how many he's got now? So, it produces that kind of thing. What should happen, I would fault the theologians here. What should happen when people are putting forth views that seem questionable is that a debate should go on in the theological community. Rome doesn't have to rush in. If things are said that are stupid or out of it or weird or not in touch with the tradition, it will get critiqued in the journals by the theologians. And the theologians in this case haven't done that. And I don't know the whole reason why, but I mean, no theologian has written an extended critique of his books. And so that should happen. That's how you come to the truth, is through dialogue among your peers. That is, people who read the same sources and who can